can you hear what's going on downstairs? Got a little quieter now. There it is. Construction on the floor below us. And I'm about to start my podcast episode with Chris Washington, who's the founder of Synchronous Agency. So we will see how that goes. Chris has been a client of Union for years now. We've done a ton of different projects together. And for 25 years, he's been running his agency, Synchronous, and does a ton of work in the health space. So I actually didn't know a ton about Chris's background, which maybe says something about me, before diving into getting ready for this podcast. And so he has just a world of experiences that happened before starting his agency that we're going to dive into, and look forward to you hearing about those directly from Chris. Let's go. Man, how long have we been working together now, Chris?
It's got to be several years. I'm really bad with the time thing. I want to say maybe, at least like 3-4 years, something like that.
Yeah. I feel like it was post-COVID, but recently post-COVID.
Yes. Yeah. I think you're right.
About 20 years ago, I believe.
At least. It seems like it could be any amount of time ago.
And also yesterday.
Things went together.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I realized as I was kind of getting ready for our chat together was, I was like, man, Chris and I have talked so many times, but I know so little about your actual background before Synchronous. And I think we were talking maybe 2 months ago, and you brought up some of writing frameworks when I was with, and then name dropped an agency. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a big agency. And, I began to realize how much you had done in some pretty big name agencies before launching your own really successful agency. So, I don't know, give me the 2 minutes of Chris Washington before Synchronous began.
Well, let's see. I graduated from Ithaca College. I was an ad geek at that time.
1.0 GPA.
Log. I'm not going to comment on that. I graduate. And I met my wife there. We were both ad geeks doing the National Student Advertising Competition, NSAC.
Romance.
That was something. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We did that. That gave us an opportunity to go to New York. Both of us were from Pennsylvania. And so we immediately left the nest after graduating college, went straight to New York City. And we had some internships, but eventually I ended up at McCann Erickson, which is a large agency there. My wife was at J. Walter Thompson. And we kind of did that for about 4 years. And that was really, for me, that was college, living in New York City and being able to be a account service person at McCann Erickson was just an incredible learning experience, really, and taught me a lot of what I know.
What were some of the accounts you were working on at that time?
I worked on mainly telco. So at that time, it was AT&T Business Services. Then the agency won Motorola, and I had the ability to work on Motorola, which at that time was a primary leader in mobile phone technology. The start
couldn't break them, that's for sure.
You could not. They really were tremendous products. I'm sure they still make very good products. But I worked on those and did a new business rotation, which is something that a lot of kind of upcoming, McCanners are able to do. And that really was incredible. You're able to be on new business teams, serving in whatever capacity you're able to. But what you get to see is the development of a pitch, from the beginning to end, and all the parts of that. And it really is, it's absolutely fascinating. The caliber of thinking at McCann is really something that I've never experienced, before or since, in terms of just the tremendous thinkers. And that was formative. One of the things that I took away from McCann was really the idea of craft, and that strategy and brand, which are words that people kind of eschew, I think today, are essential. And it is very much about craft. It takes a long time to develop something that's truly exceptional. So that was a wonderful experience there. And then from there, I ended up at that time, not to date myself even further, there was this internet thing that was becoming bigger. And so
I don't think it'll stick around though. So
yeah,
get past that.
Yeah, I ended up, going to Boston, where at the time there was a division of Arnold, which is a large agency system, here in the Northeast, that was doing internet marketing. And so I became kind of a director there, and worked on, again, a number of accounts. We had Verizon, so still, kind of staying in the telco world. And that was a primary client. That was a really great time, and also a stressful one, and ended up going to a mid-sized agency.
Why stressful?
Especially in the earlier days of internet marketing, people treated it like conventional advertising. And there's always this thing, we know we're wasting 50% of our budget. I don't know which 50%. I think the same thing applied. There was a lot of stress and pressure over, at that time, believe it or not, when you had to make changes, they had to be made by a developer. I mean, and be compiled and do all these things. There was no WordPress. These were all bespoke, handmade sites using different technologies. And it was just fraud, it was a fraud time. Clients wanted things quickly, and it wasn't always easy to do things quickly. It was a different. But anyway, I ended up moving to a mid-sized agency where it was more of a mix of, more traditional and also internet, and before eventually, deciding to kind of go off on our own.
And what was kind of that moment that led you to consider opening your own shop, or had you always kind of dreamed of doing that?
I don't know if I always dreamed of doing it. Had I had to do it again, I wouldn't, I think. Right? This was actually shortly after 9/11, for folks who remember that. It was a really devastating time. And it was also, there was a severe economic downturn, of course, that, came right after 9/11. And at that time, the agency I was working at knew that it just couldn't last for a variety of factors, and ended up kind of going out at that period. And a lot of agencies actually did, not just agencies, but, businesses generally had a very difficult period then. And around that time, and there's a lot more to it, but essentially it made more sense for myself and a business partner to really, we felt we had the experience to do it. We could add value, be very nimble, and kind of really, the realization we had is we can add a lot of value without a lot of the overhead that clients don't often care for. That's what kind of pushed us in that direction.
Was there an idea of a type of work specifically, or like a core deliverable that you thought you guys could deliver really well initially?
Yeah.
Has that changed?
We did. In fact, there was a very specific thing, and it really was around high measurability, a lot of quantification. And so we actually developed at that time a unique analytic platform. It was a in-house platform that we created that could give you a really granular level of detail on, what was working. It's essentially, it's a little bit like a very nascent Google Analytics, but we also could attach, lead generation information and things like that to it. We really went at things in a very quantifiable way. This is sort of performance marketing before performance marketing was a thing. And, eventually it became very clear that, we could do one or the other. We could do advertising and marketing, or we could be a software company, and we were not a software company. So we ended up, focusing in on marketing advertising.
Did the analytics and the data, or even like the proof of things working, did that remain like in the back end when you guys switched to advertising? Like, was it still a selling point?
It was. I mean, we always have, wanted to be effective for our clients. I think that the way that the world evolved, over time, naturally within the marketing world and really just the total business world is more toward a performance system. No matter what you're doing, analytics, plays a significant role. But it's also the idea, I think in many ways, we might have gone in some cases too far. I guess a lesson from that time is, it's quantitative, but it's also qualitative. I think that's a really important thing that we try to keep in mind is we need to look at the biggest picture when trying to understand if what we're doing is impactful, if it's achieving strategic objectives. What are the goals? How can we measure those over time? And that's particularly important when you're not selling widgets, but when you're selling services or you're selling, complex conceptual offerings. And you really need to understand not just from what's happening at each persona, at each step along the funnel and these kinds of things, what's happening in the bigger picture. Can we be impactful there?
Yeah. It feels like obviously it's two kind of different services, but I think within the proof of results, there are stakeholders in organizations that if you're going to win work with them, you have the creative director or head of marketing or CMO. Again, that gets a little more analytical, but some of the folks you might be working with more directly care more about hey, let's make some cool stuff. And then there's the other side that is very focused on, if we're going to hire these guys, are results proven? How are we going to attach a return or results from this investment? Is that kind of what you found? Did you end up, seeing different stakeholders? Who did you often work with at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, we always work with typically, the C-suite or, executive director level folks. And I think that it's very important for agencies to position themselves appropriately, going in. So I think you have to manage expectations and people have to understand what it is that you do in order to be measured that way. It's very difficult to navigate that today, both as a client and as an agency, just because so many, believe it or not, so many terms have been conflated: digital marketing, performance marketing, all these kinds of things, and the kinds of analytics that people are looking at. I think that they're just jargon, in many cases. And you have to say, yes, we do this. It's almost like you're answering an algorithm, that there are these keywords that you have to say in order for clients to buy. And I think for us, it's been very important to explain, that's not necessarily who we are. We believe that it's important for you to be able to quantify, to some degree what we do, but a lot of what we tried to do is qualitative. If you can do something to impact, qualitative perceptions of an entity, a brand, a product, a service, that is going to have conversion value. If you can create preference is something that is somewhat difficult to quantify. You can do it, but people don't do it anymore. There aren't the kinds of studies that are done, at least for most mid-level brands, to really understand that.
Yeah. When you guys began to get a few years in, or at least when we started to engage with you, which was many years in, it does seem like there was a bent into some specific market niches like health, behavioral health. Were there other areas that you guys were playing in a lot, or what led to some of your focuses?
We ended up, it's a somewhat interesting story, but maybe it's not, I don't know. But
I like somewhat interesting. Yeah.
We went from really focusing on manufacturers of various, products, B2B, heavy B2B technology and this sort of thing. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, it's because it was my experience. It was also the experience of my business partner, where that's where we had most of our experience. In New England, we're in the Boston area. There happens to be a lot of medical manufacturing and, device manufacturers and these kinds of things, which actually has shifted over time. Even now, I think the pharmaceutical marketplace has, changed dramatically in terms of, where headquarters are and those kinds of things. So there are some business reasons for it, but the pivotal moment that brought us into the niche where we are today was when a friend of my business partner, a long-time friend, said, "Hey, I'm this marketing person today at a behavioral healthcare provider. So this is an addiction treatment and mental health, service provider. And I'm not really a marketing person. I just have that role, and you have to help me." And so, we kind of put our heads together and said, we'll help you any way we can, but we have no idea, anything about that space.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And, she said, "Hey, I'll teach you about, this field if you can help me." And that's what happened. And we immediately, became deeply enamored with behavioral healthcare. It was the people who were tremendous. It's the mission, of the entities is tremendous. The work that's done, but even more, I have to say, there is a tremendous visceral connection between the work, believe it or not, of therapy, psychotherapy, and behavioral healthcare, and advertising. I mean, obviously, you are literally working to create persuasion, and if you it's psychology at its root, and we really developed a passion for it. It ended up that we not only worked with this particular client, but then through referral, we were kind of started to get passed around. And what we found is that this field is looked at in a somewhat mitigated way. It's the stepchild, of the mainstream medical community, and it shouldn't be. The work that's being done is science-based and advanced and sophisticated and hugely important, and increasingly so. So, our mission was to bring a level of thinking and expertise and capability to this field that they may not have had access to before. And that's really what we strive to do. One of the things that we've learned, over time is there's a really important meeting point in the behavioral health field and marketing. And it's around this notion of a therapeutic concept called the common factors of psychotherapy. And many studies have been done about the common factors, but when you look at the common factors that make psychotherapy work and do all the placebo studies and things like this, you come down to, 3 to 5 primary factors. One of the things that makes psychotherapy work for people, and this is regardless of what it's for, this could be to treat depression or anxiety or a mood disorder or addiction, for that matter, therapeutic rapport is absolutely primary. The ability for an individual to say, I trust this person. I think this person is qualified to help me and that they can help me is simple, but it's actually the most important aspect of what you can establish with an individual as a clinician. And what we realized is that if we do our work extremely well, if we accurately represent this organization and we help people understand why this organization is well suited to address their needs or the needs of their family member, perhaps we can start to plant the seeds for that beneficial therapeutic alliance. That becomes a different goal, than how many of this we're getting or number of impressions and those kinds of things. And if we can do that, I think we've done a very good job.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. I mean, we talk about that in video content all the time because there's no real other medium where you're able to tell a story, create such emotional resonance, add music, have character, like there's so much going on. And it's, why we're obsessed with movies and everything's a streaming service. And we all spend, more time than we want to admit watching shows during the week. And so what you're saying resonates with me so much. And the idea of building trust prior to arrival and then potentially the results of that patient's experience being expedited or turning out better because they started a little bit further down the trust journey is really fascinating. Have you heard any anecdotes from clients related to that trust building? It would probably be quite a bridge to kind of get back to say, hey, this marketing built trust and therefore this patient was further along, but any stories at all there?
That is in fact what we hear. And I think it's why we're able to do those things. We know from specific anecdotal stories from patients or patients' families that, the work that they saw, the amount of effort that was put into every aspect of a provider's brand and presence, including video, of course, which is oftentimes a foundational part of that.
Couldn't agree on.
Is really help make their decision. I think what's really important to talk about there is, we only help an organization that we find is truly exceptional in providing, very high quality care. And it's very important that the information that's provided is accurate and that it is appropriately representative of who they can help. There's something really important that we always talk about as people who create things. And, it's this idea of storytelling. Storytelling is good. And that's important. And I think people enjoy stories. This is why we watch those shows, every night for a variety of reasons, but, we can learn from them, but we love stories. Brands should not be telling their story. They should be telling their customers' story. They're helping tell their customer story. That's the work, that we do. And that's what is particularly effective. It's not very relevant or resonant, if you're seeing, hear interviews with these people. And so, yeah, they seem qualified to do whatever. And this, by the way, cuts across. It doesn't matter what category you're talking about. I think when you look at the roots of strategy, if you will, it's really about aspiration. How do we see ourselves? The very best messaging, whether that be in advertising or blog or vlog, whatever it is, anything that is attributing to building a brand and brand preference is not about the brand. It is about, how the brand makes the buyer feel about themselves. That's what we try to keep in mind is this helping someone perceive themselves as, in our example, in the example of behavioral health, is this the highest quality care that we can find for ourselves or our loved one? Do they have the qualifications? Can I relate, as an individual? Do they deal with the same issues that we're experiencing? And what does this say about us? It's storytelling, but it's a particular type of storytelling that results in the ability for people to come back and say, yes, that's me. That resonates with me. I can see that this satisfies a need that I have. So, we do hear specific quantitative feedback anecdotally from people a lot that the work being done resonates.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people had said it before. I think of Donald Miller and some of his work with StoryBrand and things like that related to making your client, making your customer the hero. And in the story, showing the potential aspirational outcome that they can achieve. And how much or how often do you, especially in initial engagements with clients who want to tell their own story, first and foremost, steering them over to telling the customer story instead, what has helping people cross that bridge looked like, and what do some of those conversations look like?
It doesn't take a whole lot, I think, to convince people that they want to tell their best story. I shouldn't say that, but most businesses, I think, want to do that. If you see something in an organization or brand and you say, there's nascent possibility here, you haven't tapped it yet. There's more here. That's what helps a business grow. And I think the notion of helping a brand become, or get into the evoked set is still very resonant. We talk about that in different ways today, but that's still, it's the same idea. Who do you think of when you think of X? That's very powerful. One of the things that I think people realize or can come to realize is it's also very cost effective. And this is something that, I think people forget. We're so focused on quantitative measures. We're so focused on, again, performance-based marketing. Things, for example, like, and there's nothing wrong with this, but, SEO is huge. Is everything that we're doing contributing to search? Well, sure, it can, but frankly, that's not the be-all, end-all. And there is no one be-all, end-all. But one thing that helps everything is it converting? Is it resonating with people? If you can increase preference and decrease barriers to entry, everything that you do is going to be more cost effective because it increases the likelihood. You're getting much closer to decisioning.
One of the things that I feel like I say every time I have an initial phone call with somebody talking about, video content, want to produce advertising content or marketing content, is around the focus on trying to increase the value of the project because the cost is never cheap to do. So video is always an investment. So how do you maximize that investment? But some people don't want to go down that road. Now, I know with a lot of the folks that we've worked with alongside you, they have a value for quality. Have they just been so fully indoctrinated by you at that point that they see the value for quality? And what is lost in those who maybe don't take the plunge into quality and are looking to just push volume or something else?
I think it's a really important question. And I think that's something that, in my opinion, many organizations can learn from today. Is I don't know that you can talk someone into doing something like this if they don't want to. It's very difficult, to convince someone who is looking at something from a purely monetary standpoint or a purely quantitative, standpoint. How many X is this going to get me? Is this going to get me more leads? Is it going to get me more clients or customers or what have you? It's very hard to say. I think that you can look at basic statistics and say, yes, it's not the right mentality. And again, maybe that's not the right client or customer, for this particular outing. I think that, organizations that are quality focused, that's part of their DNA. And they already recognize that. Again, it's not terribly difficult to sell that idea to someone who wants it. If they don't want it, you can try, to say, hey, this is really going to, make a substantial difference in how people perceive you, but it can be an uphill battle. I think that one of the things that does help are, case studies. If we can try to share cases that say, look, you have a very good offering. If more people understood that offering in a more emotive way, some people respond better to that.
Have you noticed any consistencies within organizations that you guys have gone to work with when it comes to delivering your focus on quality versus quantity? Any sort of common threads, commonalities?
Yeah, I think it's a real thing right now, particularly for healthcare. So this is a little bit about a moment in time, but frankly, I think it's something that it's broad enough and has been happening for long enough to talk about. We are living through a period of tremendous consolidation within the healthcare field, all aspects of healthcare. And the primacy of venture capital and, all of these sorts of things is everyone is being consolidated and kind of gobbled up. And that has real implications for all patients everywhere, where you will see, for example, replacing retiring physicians with nurses assistants, for example, higher caseloads, moves toward telehealth and these kinds of things. Within the healthcare space, particularly, there are inherent challenges, particularly in the behavioral healthcare space. We're also seeing, potentially some policy decisioning that might change the way that, some behavioral healthcare is allocated and access, to behavioral health. So that, I think, creates its own dynamics in the space. And it also increases a lot of pressure on operators. And that's something that everyone, I think, will experience in terms of accessing care, the cost of accessing high quality treatment. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did. And and it actually brought me back to something that I was thinking before, which was you talked about building trust as one of the advantages to good marketing, good advertising for behavioral health. What are some of the challenges, not just in building trust, but some of the other common challenges that you see within those health organizations that you work with? Anything consistently across the board that they face that are hurdles to overcome with their message, ways to get in front of their audience, anything consistent?
There is. I mean, there is a move toward commonality, and you'll have to forgive. This is not meant to be as pejorative as it's going to sound, but there's a
Sorry, I don't know what that means anyway.
there's a lowest common denominator mentality. What does successful marketing mean? There becomes a formulaic. Here's the marketing that we need to do, and some of that is the result, perhaps, of a new crop of marketers coming into the field. It could be education, what people are learning about what effective marketing looks like. It could be the availability of channels, for example, where I think we have either a profusion of channels or there's a lot, and technology becomes a thing. Again, it goes back to the notion that, performance marketing is the be all and end all, and we have to have everything absolutely quantifiable, and iterative marketing where it's like, tons of executions and things like this. I think what you end up with in many cases is a client organization where they're naturally more stretched than, say, a main brand or a large scale brand in terms of resources. And they're in a landscape that is prioritizing kind of this, one size fits all marketing approach. And I think that leads to a tremendous amount of commonality and expectations among operators, among investors, that we need to be doing these several things, and that will equate to success. It does not work, I think, for a lot of people. It puts an undue emphasis on very specific quantitative measures that really don't actually lead to, in the case of many of our clients, census, how many clients you have, the health of that census.
So you're saying a lot of folks are coming across the same way, sounding the same way, looking the same way, presenting in the same places. You can nearly switch logos with 7 different organizations and 7 different names, and it really doesn't matter. To put you on the spot, are there any organizations you see standing outside of the large groups right now? Anyone who is doing a good job not getting lost in the sea of sameness, but for some reason or another standing out?
Some of our clients.
Only and also.
No. There are certainly exceptions, to that rule. I don't know that I'll name them, but I think they certainly can be found. But it takes courage, I think, for those operators to do it. And what's interesting to me about that is some of the organizations that are doing this are some of the more successful organizations and some of the longest standing organizations. It's interesting because, I wish that more directors of these organizations would take a cue from that and say, like, geez, these guys put a lot of energy and effort into ensuring that people understand what they do, that, we have very cogent communication, that we are very meticulous with our word and with our brand. That's important. Accurately, ethically representing, your program and programming and your capabilities and the nuances that make you appropriate to a particular cohort is one of the most important things that you can do, especially because competition in the space, I'm talking about, behavioral healthcare, mental health care. Fortunately, we're living through tremendous epidemic rates, of these issues. Quality treatment is essential. And it's one of these things that no one really understands until you need to. We don't, how do you position something that no one wants to need,
Yeah.
And I think that's something people need to think more about. So yeah, there are organizations that are doing it well, and they have a commitment to it, but a lot aren't.
If you're saying a lot of the long established and successful ones seem to maybe be stepping out from the pack of the up and comers or want to be disruptors, do you think because of some level of status or security, they're a little more willing to take risks with the way that they stand out because they feel like they have less to lose because they're already so well established, versus somebody mid-sized or newer on the block is like, man, we need to play this safe, which I think is a bigger risk in and of itself. Does it seem that way? Or does it seem that they just maybe have more, like you talked about with McCann, more good brains in the room that they just have that advantage?
I don't know, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I think that when you have a brand with history, they've been successful. And it so happens, I think that, many of those organizations also happen to have dedicated the time and effort to build, a powerful brand that is recognized, within the field, particularly in our case, it's among professionals. If you ask referring professionals, where would you send your child, or where would you send your partner, or for yourself? Sure. These are the organizations that kind of come to mind. I think that those two things kind of go hand in hand, the longevity and the dedication to really ensuring that you are representing yourself well. Those two things are related. A successful long-term brand in any category knows that it must satisfy particular needs in the consumer's hero's journey, if you will. How are we checking off those boxes?
And in the journey of Synchronous, what's kind of ahead? You talked just a moment ago about kind of some of the changing landscape, some of the mergers, acquisitions related to a lot of folks who are or would be your client type. What are some of the things that you guys are excited about in the next 6 months or year that are coming up, or that you hope to be doing with people?
I don't know if excited is the right word. No, I think no, it is exciting. I think, as individuals in this space, we're sort of ancillary to the space, but related to the space, we are concerned about those changes, the access to care. We're concerned for when individuals, that need to access mental health care, behavioral health care, especially for people with low recovery capital. And so part of what we're actually excited about is using some of the knowledge that we've accumulated and some of the folks that we're in touch with to bring more awareness to that. Perhaps we'd love to help to get some of that knowledge out there, just so that people can understand, and maybe people who are in a position to do so can respond or advocate for access and for change.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I know, as a studio, we've been around not as long as you guys, certainly, but 14 years. We feel pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
And over the last handful of years, probably 4 or 5 years, a lot of the direction that we've taken as we slowly began to work with more and more health brands, health and wellness brands, has really led us to basically focus solely within that niche and space and understanding some of the problems that exist there. And I resonate so much with what you're saying because of that. When you're doing work that helps humans in a way that is often at some of their most critical junctures, Monday morning feels totally different than, when you're just pushing something that's a nice to have, or even a brand you maybe don't fully believe in. Obviously, an unbreakable flip cell phone is a totally different animal. That's a critical life changer there. But get that T9 going. But yeah, so I completely resonate with what you're saying. And I can imagine that a lot of organizations, even hearing you say that, Boston area or beyond, would probably be really good fits for Synchronous if you guys have the time or space to take them on.
If we can help, we're happy to help. But yeah, I will say, I think the original meaning of happiness is not what we consider it to be today, which is more affiliated with elation or joy and these kinds of things. The original meaning of happiness was to do something well, and the original great term. And if we can do that, the work is not easy. It's not hard. And in fact, I'll tell you, it's often not lucrative. But, I think to your point, we can feel pretty good about it. We really oftentimes feel, if we can contribute in any way, to individuals in need, being able to access high quality treatment, and if we can be a part of that in any way, we feel really blessed, to be able to play any role, in that at all. And so I think you're right. That's something that is rewarding, I guess, in and of itself.
Well, let's go out on that. The real meaning of happiness. Chris Washington from Synchronous, thanks for coming on The Union Way. It's been a pleasure chatting, as always.
Absolutely. Yeah, same here. Thank you, Justin.